Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. All persons having anything to do before the Honorable Justice of the Superior Court, now sitting at Boston, within and for the County of Suffolk, draw near, give your attendance, and you shall be heard. God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and this Honorable Court. This court is now open. Please be seated.
Your Honor, for the record, continuation of the trial of Ramos versus Michael McCarthy on docket number 15-11292. All parties are present and 14 jurors are present.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Before we get underway, again, I just want to make sure that you follow my instructions and you haven't talked about this case with anyone, haven't done any independent investigation of the facts of the law, that you haven't heard or read any news reports, and that nothing else has occurred overnight to affect your ability to be fair and impartial. If you have followed my instructions and there's nothing to report, I would just ask again that you raise your hands. Okay, thank you. So now that the evidence is closed, we've reached that stage of the case in which each attorney will have an opportunity to address you in closing arguments. And I just want to remind you that the closing arguments, like the opening statements, are not evidence. They're the opportunity for each party through the lawyer to give you that lawyer's position as to what inferences you might draw from the evidence so that you understand the position of each party. If the lawyer refers to some part of the evidence that does not accord with your memory, then it is your memory that controls. Because the Commonwealth does have the burden of proof, that also means that Mr. Deacon gets to have the last word, so I'll turn things over to Mr. Shapiro. I will say, just in terms of how we're going to proceed, we may take a short break between the two closing arguments, depending on how long they are. We will then take our morning break before I end up instructing you on the law. The closing arguments are lengthy, as are my instructions, so if it looks like you're going to need a break before I anticipate taking a break, I'm asking you to indicate that, and I'll actually ask you if that's what you'd wish to do, because I don't want to make anybody uncomfortable sitting too long. So, Mr. Shapiro, you're up.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Thank you for your patience and attention during this trial. You've all made a great sacrifice in your personal lives, and we appreciate it. Now, first of all, I recognize, as we all do, the almost unimaginable tragedy in the death of a young child. As a father and as a grandfather, I can feel the pain and the sorrow contemplating such an untimely death. We all feel the need to see that justice is done. But as Judge Sanders will tell you, these feelings for little Bella Bond can play no part in your deliberations. Your verdict must not be influenced by passion or prejudice, by sympathy or sorrow. Your verdict must be based solely on a dispassionate consideration of the evidence that has been presented. And I'm sure you'll do that. The question that will be facing you when you deliberate on a verdict is whether the prosecution has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. McCarthy, and only Mr. McCarthy, murdered Bella Bond. And my job in these closing remarks is to demonstrate how the prosecution has failed completely to prove its case to the very high standard required by the law. Remember, as Judge Sanders will instruct you, the prosecution must prove Mr. McCarthy's guilt to a moral certainty, the highest degree possible, the highest degree of certainty possible in matters of human affairs. Now, let's look at the evidence. During the jury selection process, you all indicated in one way or another that scientific evidence would play an important role in your consideration. That makes sense. We know how reliable modern science can be. We know that advanced technology provides ways of gathering and analyzing evidence to achieve accurate results. In this case, you've heard evidence from forensic scientists that DNA can be detected in bodily fluids and skin cells, and that it can be used to positively identify a person. We've heard about fingerprints, which can also be used to positively identify an individual. We heard about the scientific analysis of blood, of hair, of stains. And we heard from a forensic pathologist about an autopsy and a toxicology report. But here's what we haven't heard. We have not heard that there is any scientific evidence to link Mr. McCarthy to this crime. Not a shred of evidence, not an iota of evidence. There is no scientific evidence that Mr. McCarthy had anything to do with the evidence that the prosecution claims is related to this crime. His DNA was not found. His fingerprints were not found. His hair was not found. Each of the forensic scientists who testified agreed that he or she did not find any link between Mr. McCarthy and this crime. Nothing, nothing, nothing. So we start our analysis of the evidence without any scientific evidence that links Mr. McCarthy to this crime. Not a bit. But of course, during jury selection, you all agreed that even if there were no scientific evidence, you would be able to reach a verdict based on other evidence if that evidence were sufficient to prove Mr. McCarthy's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay, let's look at that evidence. What other evidence is there? The only other evidence in this case that Mr. McCarthy committed this crime is the testimony of Rochelle Bond. That is the only evidence the prosecution has. Without her testimony, the prosecution has no case at all. So each of you must ask yourself, is Rochelle Bond's testimony credible enough, believable enough, or accurate enough to persuade you of Mr. McCarthy's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt? And if you ask yourself that question, the inevitable answer is, of course not. The story she told was clearly made up to cover her own guilt. It was a web of lies and a changing web of lies. You know that. Her testimony was so incredible, so unworthy of belief, so full of holes, so contradicted by other evidence, and so clearly motivated by her desire to escape her own responsibility for Bella's death by throwing Mr. McCarthy under the bus. Rochelle Bond made up the story she told you and the police. She made it up when she realized the stories she first told to escape her responsibility for Bella's death were about to fall apart. Rochelle covered up Bella's death with calculated and studied intent from June until September of 2015. She explained to everyone that Bella was somewhere else. She lied to everyone. And there is no doubt that her lies and her cover-up were convincing. She told Michael that Bella had been taken by DCF because someone had reported that Rochelle had been spanking Bella. She told him, Michael, and she actually quoted the DCF caseworker. She said that the worker had told her that he could do it the easy way or the hard way and just take the child or call the police. But you know the truth. There was no caseworker. Rochelle quoted a made-up person. Bella was not in DCF custody. That story was a lie. But Michael believed her, And it was reasonable for him to believe her because he knew that DCF had taken two of Rochelle's older children and that DCF had already been involved with Bella Bond during the first year of Bella's life. But Rochelle steadfastly kept up this pretense with Michael throughout the summer. And in August, she even asked Michael to do an internet search for a pattern for the baby blanket she claimed she was going to crochet for Bella when Bella came home. Joseph McCarthy Jr., Michael's brother, told you that Rochelle told him that Bella was with her sister for the summer, and that's why Bella wasn't at the family reunion in New Hampshire on July 25th. She also told Michael Sprinsky that DCF had placed Bella with her sister because of Rochelle's drug use. That's why on September 16th, when Sprinsky met Rochelle near the Boston Medical Center, he remarked that Bella would be able to come home after Rochelle told him that she was off of drugs. But Rochelle lied to him too. On July 14th, during the annual inspection of her apartment by the Wynn Management Company, you heard from Ingrid Perlera that Rochelle told her that Bella was staying with her mother. And the very next day, when she met with Keith Williams to apply for housing benefits from the RAF program, she went on at some length to explain to Mr. Williams that her daughter was with a friend that day and that her daughter had been having a wonderful summer at the beach. All lies. She also lied so that the absence of her daughter would not be noticed. She has pleaded guilty to larceny for lying about Bella so that she would receive almost $2,000 in benefits over the summer on behalf of Bella. She also lied about Bella being a member of her household on July 1st, when Paula Andrews recertified Rochelle so she could continue to receive a rent subsidy for her two-bedroom apartment. She lied when she certified that Bella was a member of her household on July 13th, when she applied for a continuation of her housing subsidy with Susan Noel of the Metropolitan Boston Housing Partnership. And she lied when she certified that Bella was a member of her household on July 15th, when she applied for supplemental benefits with Mr. Williams. These were lies Rochelle told during the summer of 2015, all and solely to keep her better apartment and to get benefits she was only eligible for if Bella was alive. But all that time, Rochelle knew that Bella was dead. She was the only one who knew that Bella was dead, and all the lies she told were concocted to cover up her responsibility for her daughter's death. In September, however, her sinister house of cards was about to fall apart. When Joey Amoroso, Bella's father, showed up at the Maxwell Street apartment on September 9th and September 15th, demanding to see Bella, Rochelle tried lying again. She told him that Bella was staying with her godparents on the Cape and would not be back for another month. But Rochelle had a big problem. Rochelle knew Amoroso would not go away. She knew he wasn't buying her story. She knew he was about to call her bluff and her deception. She knew Amoroso, who came to her house banging on the door and yelling obscenities at her in the street, was likely to go to DCF and complain that Rochelle was preventing him from seeing his daughter. Rochelle was feeling the pressure. She knew Amoroso had already complained to DCF twice during Bella's first year of life, complained that his daughter was at risk of harm because of Rochelle's drug use. And Rochelle was afraid. She knew that if he complained again, the authorities would absolutely discover that Bella was dead and discover that she, the little girl's mother, was responsible. Now remember, Amoroso testified that when he saw Rochelle in September, he was concerned that Bella was at risk again because he believed that Rochelle was on drugs. So it was clear to Rochelle that she needed a new story, a new cover-up. And Rochelle's self-protective lying kicked into high gear. The next morning, after Amoroso's rowdy and profane late-night appearance at Maxwell Street, when he demanded to see his daughter for the second time, Rochelle left Michael, knowing he was in pain and in need of medical help at the Boston Medical Center. With Michael out of the way, she put her new cover-up into motion. And what was her new story? She told Michael's childhood friend, Michael Sprinsky, that Michael had killed Bella. She claimed to be so upset and so traumatized about what had happened to Bella that she couldn't keep quiet any longer. Now that she was finally able to get away from Michael, she said, because he was in the hospital, she just had to get it off her chest. Even Sprinsky didn't believe that her tears were real. He testified that he thought that she was putting it on. Remember, I said to him, you thought she was faking, didn't you? And he said, yes. And of course, we have a photographic record of how Rochelle looked at about noon on that day because she took a selfie with the phone she just bought. Does this look like a mother who is grief-stricken over the death of her child? Does this look like a mother who has finally escaped from the clutches of the boyfriend who she later claimed had killed her child 4 months earlier and held her hostage until she was able to escape when he was hospitalized? Of course not. It looks like a scheming, manipulative woman who, to save her own skin, is about to falsely accuse her boyfriend of murder. It looks like a woman who is sticking her tongue out at the world saying, watch this, I'm about to get away with murder. The fact that Michael was in the hospital did not give Rochelle the opportunity to escape his clutches, because as you've heard and saw again and again and again during this trial, that was never the situation. Come on, Rochelle Bond, who took a $180 cab ride to beat up her sister's boyfriend, was never in anyone's clutches. Instead, at the pivotal moment outside the Walgreens and the liquor store, at that pivotal moment, Michael Sprinsky was the first to hear the new story that Rochelle was floating. And she knew Michael, who she had left behind in the hospital for surgery, was in no position to defend himself. Of course, if her new story were true, that Michael had killed Bella and had held Rochelle hostage for 4 months, you would expect that the first thing that Rochelle would do would be to go to the police. But that was the last thing that Rochelle wanted to do. She needed time to figure out what she would say and what story she would tell and how she would handle it when the police finally caught up with her. So the next 2 days, Rochelle evaded the police. On the night of September 16th, she didn't return to Maxwell Street. Instead, she spent the night with Amoroso in the Seaport District next to the Fort Point Channel. a short distance from where she had disposed of Bella's body. Then, on the morning of September 17th, she went back to Maxwell Street. We don't believe the story she told Amoroso, that she was going home to take a shower because she had an appointment with her therapist. That's ridiculous. She went to Maxwell Street to get rid of any incriminating evidence. When the police searched the apartment later that day, where were the drugs that she had been using? Where was the drug paraphernalia, the syringes, the needles, the heroin, the pills that she'd been using? Where was the evidence of what had happened to Bella? Obviously, she used that morning to get rid of it. Isn't that why she wouldn't let Amoroso come to the apartment with her, even though she claimed to be so afraid that Michael might be there? Isn't that why her neighbor in the adjacent apartment heard the water running and the toilet flushing? And you remember what happened next. The police arrived. Rochelle, who tearfully declared that she had to tell the police, that she finally had to reveal what had happened. What did she do when the police showed up to the door? Did she welcome them? No. She jumped out her window. She jumped out the window and ran. Why did she jump out the window when she realized the police were there? If her story were true, wouldn't she have thrown herself into the arms of the police? Wouldn't she have been relieved to finally be free and able to report what had happened to Bella to the authorities? Obviously, she hadn't gotten rid of all the evidence yet, and she wasn't ready to tell her fictional story yet. That's what she did for the rest of the day and night with Amoroso. She needed this time to figure out what she would tell the police. Both she and Amoroso disabled their phones so they couldn't be located, and she planned her new story. They spent the day doing drugs on Boston Common and spent the night at the home of Amoroso's mother in Lynn. They did not contact the police, who they knew had come to Amoroso's mother's apartment earlier that evening. That night, the grieving parents of Bella Bond took a shower together. The next morning, the police came and took Rochelle into custody, and the curtain went up on Rochelle Bond's performance. She now had to tell her story to Trooper Herman and Lieutenant Murphy of the State Police. That was quite a moment. It was the first time she would try the cover-up of her fantasy. And what a disaster that was. There is a problem when you make up a story, particularly when what you are making up supposedly took place 4 months earlier. The devil is in the details, and Rochelle's story that Michael killed Bella was full of holes, gaping holes, ridiculous holes, unbelievable holes, because it wasn't true. First, of course, the police wanted to know when this terrible crime happened. At first, Rochelle was pretty vague about it, probably because she didn't want to get caught up in the pesky details. So she said that it happened in the middle of May, sometime before Michael's birthday on May 29th. But she must have realized that that wasn't very convincing. She realized very correctly that everyone would expect that a mother would remember the day her daughter was killed. How could a mother not remember the month, the day, and the exact minute? So she then told the police that she did remember exactly when it occurred, on May 27th, 2 days before Michael's birthday. She remembered exactly, and that's what she told the police on September 18th. She said that she now was certain But soon she realized, uh-oh, she had a big hole in her story. When she made it up, she didn't remember that she had sent Michael a text on June 1st, and in that text she had said, "Belle sends her love." Uh-oh. Since Bella was alive on June 1st, Rochelle's story that she had been killed on May 27th was just not possible. Demonstrably untrue. Another big hole. By the time Rochelle testified before you, it had become clear that Michael's car was out of service on May 27th, in the garage being repaired, and that the repairs were not completed until June 1st at the earliest. Uh-oh, another problem. That incontrovertible fact, which Rochelle forgot, meant Bella could not have been killed on May 27th and her body put in Michael's car that day or a day later to be driven away and disposed of, because Michael's car was not available. The car was in a garage being repaired. So, Rochelle tried to fix her story. When she testified here before you, she was no longer certain anymore about when it happened. She now could only tell you it was early June. She says that she was a stay-at-home mother and really couldn't remember a day or even a month. She didn't know, she insisted, whether it was a weekday or a weekend. It was the day she claims her own little daughter was killed. But Rochelle, who couldn't remember dates, somehow did suddenly remember exactly when Michael's car was in the shop. And she awkwardly twisted and changed her story to get it to conform to the facts. She was trapped in her own lies. One day she's certain, the next she isn't. Why? Because that story is a complete fabrication. So much of the story Rochelle first told to the police on September 18th just doesn't make sense. According to Rochelle, Michael had always been good with Bella and had never done anything to make Rochelle concerned about him. You have heard an audio of how he helped Bella deal with her nightmares in a caring and loving way. He urged her to use love to keep the monsters away. You heard, heartbreakingly, her happy little voice and how gleefully she responded to him. You heard the love in his voice. Did he sound like a person who would kill that little girl? And how about Rochelle saying she was suspicious because things quieted down after Michael went to put Bella to bed? What? You would think that she would have been happy that Bella was quiet. It just doesn't make any sense that she went to Bella's room and, as she told the police, turned on the light to see what was going on. She soon realized how silly it would be to turn on the light when they were trying to put Bella to sleep. So now she tells you, oh, the light was already on. So much of the story that Rochelle told the police during her first interview changed when she testified before you in court. But the truth doesn't change. Her story is so different today than it was back then because she wants to make it better and more persuasive, more dramatic. She wants to cover up the holes that she can't account for. She wants to make Michael McCarthy look more guilty. Another example. In Rochelle's first story to the police, she said that she never saw Mr. McCarthy strike Bella at all. She said, and I quote, "I don't know what he was doing to her," unquote. Then she said that she assumed that he had punched her in the stomach. Assumed. And you saw her demonstration in the September 18th video of her statement. She showed Michael standing, not kneeling, over Bella and moving one arm away from her stomach area. But, she realized it wouldn't be effective or persuasive to accuse someone of murder on the basis of an assumption. So now Rochelle remembers. She told you she saw Mr. McCarthy down on one knee. She saw him strike Bella in her stomach with his fist so hard that Bella bounced off the mattress and then flopped back. She changed her already fictional story. She enhanced it. She embellished it. She dramatized it, all to make Mr. McCarthy look more guilty. There's more, because lies always have more and more holes. And finally, Rochelle found another way to handle him, an easier way to handle him, less complicated. She just tells you she became unconscious. Very convenient. She now claims she lost consciousness on 3 different occasions. She claimed that she lost consciousness when Michael choked her right after he killed Bella, and she woke up on the couch sometime later. The first time she even mentioned losing consciousness then was several weeks ago when she was preparing her testimony for trial. She never told the police on September 18th that she had lost consciousness a second time and woke up a day later. That was the story she told for you just last week. And she never told the police that Michael had knocked her unconscious with his hand after taking her out to the car. All of these newly remembered periods of becoming unconscious are all ways she fills the hole in her story that she is unable to account for. Now, you remember the 4 handy excuses she used whenever she was caught in her own lies. She was in a fog of influence from drugs. She suffered a traumatic experience. It was a mistake. Or she was simply afraid of Michael. And you know, some of what Rochelle told the police in her first statement was so unbelievable that the prosecution didn't even believe it. There's the refrigerator story. Rochelle told the police in the first statement that after Michael put Bella in a plastic bag, he put her body in the refrigerator. But you did not hear that story when Mr. Deacon questioned Rochelle. He just left that part of the story out because even the prosecution doesn't believe it happened. The examination of the refrigerator did not disclose any evidence that Bella had been there. The 2 hairs that they recovered and analyzed were not from a dead person because they didn't have post-mortem banding. And the crime scene techs testified that they always find hair of the occupants of an apartment all over the place, including in the refrigerator. No, that part of the story was so unbelievable and too unbelievable even for the prosecution. So they wanted to forget about it and hope that we would forget about it as well. But when I brought out that part of Rochelle's original made-up story, she told you that what she really meant was that she assumed that Michael had put the body in the refrigerator. But did she tell you why she thought that? Or what the basis of that assumption was? No, because there wasn't any. There's more. And incredibly, some of Rochelle's story was made up for the first time during her testimony before you. For example, Rochelle denied that Mr. McCarthy ever had a weapon with him. When I asked her, do you know how hard it is to knock a person unconscious with your hand? She simply blurted out, and you heard her, that Michael dragged her to the car and he had a mallet, a hammer, and a knife. What? When her story seemed ludicrous even for her, she tried to fix it by simply lying. And then remember, she told the police on September 18th that she saw Michael put the bag with her daughter's body in it into the trunk of her car. A car, remember, that could not have been there when she said it was. But when she testified before you, she said that she saw the bag on the back seat and tearfully described seeing the imprint of Bella's thigh. How do you explain that, I asked her. How do you explain that you told the police that it was in the trunk? She told us she was mistaken. Her little daughter's murdered body was in the trunk. Oh wait, no, it wasn't. It was in the back seat. She was mistaken. Could anyone possibly make that kind of a mistake? Perhaps the most unbelievable part of the story Rochelle first told the police is her claim that Michael held her hostage from the moment he killed Bella until she was finally able to escape 4 months later when Michael was hospitalized. She first claimed that he had sedated her by forcibly injecting her with heroin so she couldn't get away. She claimed that he took her phone so she couldn't communicate with anyone. And she claimed that he never left her alone over the course of the next 4 months. Of course, when Rochelle first made up this story, she didn't realize all the holes that it had. She didn't realize that there was telephone call detail information that she showed that she used the phone, Dee's phone, all summer. She didn't realize that there was cell site location information that showed how frequently during the summer her phone and Michael's phone were widely separate. They clearly weren't together. She didn't realize that her upstairs neighbor would testify that when Rochelle needed a phone, she would borrow the neighbor's phone, sometimes 2 times a day. She didn't realize that there was all kinds of evidence that she went places on her own. She met with her therapist at Nova Psychiatric alone on June 11th, on June 22nd, on July 9th, and July 30th. She went to the Wynn Management Office alone to get recertified on July 1st. She met with Ingrid Perlera for the annual inspection of her apartment on July 14th when the CSLI shows that Michael was at the methadone clinic and in Quincy. She met with Keith Williams, the caseworker for the housing agency, alone on July 15th. And she spent most of the day on July 16th at the Boston Housing Court, alone while Michael was at the apartment. And then there are all those texts where Rochelle is asking Michael. And remember, she calls him hon and baby and says, I love you, to pick up napkins and toilet paper on the way home. Does that sound like a hostage to you? And then there were the texts from Michael to Rochelle in early September when she had gone away for a day or two and Michael couldn't even get in touch with her. Does that sound like a hostage? The whole hostage story was so clearly preposterous that she and the prosecution changed it when she testified in front of you. No longer was she forcibly sedated by Michael. Now she said that she was using heroin voluntarily. Indeed, she said it was welcome. Instead of Michael forcibly sedating her to keep her under his control, she was using the drugs to deaden the pain of her grief. A totally new story because the old one didn't make sense. Instead of saying that Michael never left her alone until he was hospitalized, now she says that she was just too scared of him to do anything, even when she was alone. She claimed to be too scared because she thought people were following her and that they might shoot her if she called 911. How absurd is that? Remember, Rochelle wasn't scared of anyone. You've heard how she paid a gypsy cab $180 to take her to Gardner in the middle of the night when her sister was having trouble with a boyfriend. Rochelle attacked the guy and forcibly threw him out of the house. She had obviously thrown Michael out of the apartment for some reason and made him sleep in the hallway. You heard that from the neighbor. You heard the audio of when she told Amoroso to get the fuck out of her house on the night of September 15th. And Amoroso told you on September 17th, after he became upset when Rochelle told him that Bella was dead, Rochelle said Bella was a bitch and then hit him in the head and told him to shut the fuck up before I get bagged. Rochelle lived a hard and dangerous life as a prostitute and drug dealer who had been in and out of jail. She learned from a very early age how to take care of herself. Does she sound like a woman who would be cowed into silence and forced to live with a man who had killed her child if that had really happened? Of course not. Her story about being too scared to do anything was a pack of lies, because there was nothing for her to be scared of, except the police and the truth. The truth is that during June, July, August, and September of 2015, Rochelle and Michael continued to live together as a couple, just as they had since he moved in at the end of February. Rochelle wasn't being held hostage by Michael. There was no reason for him to do that, because Michael did not know that Bella was dead. He thought that she was in DCF custody, that DCF had taken her, just like Rochelle had told him. Whenever he asked about Bella, Rochelle put him off by telling him, once DCF took a child, you never got her back. And remember, a neighbor testified she saw Rochelle throwing away the little girl's toys. Rochelle, only Rochelle, knew that Bella was never coming home. And after hearing her story of that horrifying evening, whenever it was, everyone wonders, why didn't she call 911? Or yell and scream for help? Well, that's easy. There was no reason for Rochelle to yell for help or call 911, because that whole terrible story that Michael killed Bella while putting her to bed was a gruesome figment of her imagination. Only Rochelle knew that Bella was dead, and the only reason for her to have called 911 was to turn herself in. And she was not about to do that. Remember her testimony before you? Compare that with the story she told police on September 18th, 2015. Do you believe her? Is that testimony believable enough to satisfy you of Mr. McCarthy's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt? The answer is, has to be, an unequivocal no. Not only is Rochelle's testimony unbelievable, but it is completely contradicted by the medical and scientific evidence of the chief medical examiner. He testified that there is no evidence whatsoever to support Rochelle's testimony that Bella suffered a massive blow to her abdomen. He testified that the blow that Rochelle described would have damaged her internal organs and broken bones. But there was no evidence of such injuries on the body, because that didn't happen. Rochelle didn't realize her story would be absolutely contradicted by the medical evidence. Dr. Niels also testified that he knew of no medical condition or injury that would have caused Bella's head to be swollen and her face to turn grayish, as Rochelle described, within the 5 minutes between the time Rochelle said she was fine and okay and the time Rochelle said she was dead. He testified that there were no injuries to Bella's head, and that is because that was just another part of Rochelle's story. But again, she didn't realize it would be contradicted by the medical testimony. Although Dr. Neal said that the cause of death could have been an asphyxial injury, like suffocation or strangulation, he agreed that none of Rochelle's testimony was consistent with that injury. That is, Rochelle did not testify that she saw Michael suffocate, strangle, or prevent Bella from breathing by putting pressure on her chest or abdomen. I asked him, is there any medical evidence that what Rochelle described actually took place? And he said no. So, bottom line, not only does the medical evidence not support Rochelle's testimony, but it contradicts it on just about every point. Now, the prosecution will no doubt argue that there is other evidence that corroborates Rochelle's testimony. They will say that this other evidence supports the truth of her testimony. But what is this evidence? Mr. Deacon will no doubt argue that Rochelle's story is true because she was able to lead the police to the place by the reserve channel where Bella's body was dumped into the water. Well, of course. But all that does is prove that Rochelle knew where the body was dumped. She would, of course, know because she dumped it. It does not prove in any way that Michael was there. Mr. Deacon will no doubt argue that the fact that the body had been weighted down with weights that could have come from the basement of Joseph McCarthy's plumbing shop corroborates Rochelle's testimony. Well, so what? The testimony of Michael's brother, Joe Jr., a witness called by the prosecution, established that Michael had brought some weights from the plumbing shop to Maxwell Street for Rochelle to use in doing sit-ups and exercises to strengthen the weakness in her stomach that had resulted from the surgery. So even if the weights did come from McCarthy's shop, there's no evidence that Michael used them to weigh down the bag. Rochelle had exactly the same access because the weights were at her apartment. The only other claims that Mr. Deacon can make about corroborating evidence are completely far-fetched. He will argue that Michael's former girlfriend, Taryn Devlin, testified that Michael and his friends hung out in areas around the reserve channel about 20 years ago. And he'll tell you that that proves that only he, and not Rochelle, was familiar with the area in which Bella's body was dumped. But the area described by Miss Devlin was not a place that anyone would go to dispose of a body. First of all, she told you that the only place that there was vehicle access, there were locked gates. When, as adolescents, they went there to hang out, they had to climb through holes in 1 or 2 chain link fences. In addition, she testified that there were fences that prevented access to the water. So, because Mr. McCarthy knew that from years ago, he'd also know that it was an impossible place to dispose of a body. On the other hand, Rochelle claimed to have had a much more recent contact with the specific area in which the body was discarded. She testified that she was in the same area after getting on the wrong bus and winding up there just a few years ago. She knew how it looked, she knew there were no fences, and she knew how easy it would be to gain access with a car because she was right there. And according to Joey Amoroso, homeless people often congregated around there, areas in South Boston adjacent to the water, like the Fort Point Channel. And we know that is where Rochelle and Amoroso spent the night of September 16th. Finally, Mr. Deacon may still argue that certain CSLI, cell site location information, proves that on June 26th, the day after Bella's body was found on Deer Island, Mr. McCarthy returned to the scene of the crime. This is fiction. Mr. Deacon may argue that because Mr. McCarthy's phone pinged off 3 towers located along Summer Street from the vicinity of South Station to the vicinity of the Reserve Channel, that is evidence that Mr. McCarthy drove there to see if there was police activity in the area. But the evidence simply doesn't support such a speculative conclusion. The prosecution's own expert, Sergeant David Krause, admitted that in the 67 seconds between the first and the third ping, it would not be possible for a car to drive that distance of over a mile along a busy street in Boston. The car would have had to travel 60 miles an hour without stopping for red lights or traffic. Even we didn't travel that fast when we drove down Summer Street to take a view, and we had motorcycle escorts. Sergeant Krause admitted that it was much more likely that Mr. McCarthy was in the area of the Methadone Mile, which was located in the overlapping footprints of all 3 towers. And it's clear from the evidence that Mr. McCarthy went to the methadone clinic in that area just about every day. So the evidence that the prosecution will argue corroborates Rochelle's story falls far short at every turn. On the contrary, it fully explains why Rochelle knew where Rochelle's body was dumped and where the weights had come from. Because she had access to the weights and because she dumped the body. And no doubt Mr. Deacon will point to the text messages between Rochelle and Michael when she was in housing court on July 16th as evidence that Michael knew that Bella was dead. They prove the exact opposite. Michael did not want the court to get involved with the supervision of Bella. At one point he texts that she not mention Bella because the judge may order DSS involvement. He says we can't lose her to the state and that we love her too much to even let those vampires be around her. On the basis of what Rochelle had told him, Michael obviously believed that DCF had taken Bella and placed her with some family member. Michael didn't want the court to get involved in addition to DCF because he thought that would make it more difficult to get Bella back. And of course, and this is so telling, Michael talks about Bella in the present tense because he believed she was alive. He texts not to mention that you have a daughter to take care of. Later he texts again that you have a daughter that you're taking care of. And then he says, we love her too much. What these texts show is that Michael truly believed that Bella was alive, and he was concerned that what happened to Rochelle's older children not happen to Bella. Now I suppose Mr. Deacon will say something about what the prosecution claims is Michael's obsession with demons and demonology. In Rochelle's made-up story, she told the police that right after Michael killed Bella, he said, she was a demon, it was her time to die. But when she testified before you, she forgot to say that. And only after Mr. Deacon prompted her several times did she finally remember to testify that Michael had said that. But in her testimony, she said that he made that statement at a different time. Once again, this proves that Rochelle's story was completely made up. Because if what she said was really true, how could she forget such a devastatingly memorable line? And the idea that Michael, who you know had previously been caring and compassionate and fatherly with Bella, would suddenly kill her because he thought she was a demon is preposterous. Is that the prosecution's theory? That Michael's motive to kill Bella was because he thought she was a demon? I suspect that that is too absurd for Mr. Deacon even to try to foist on you. I suspect that the prosecution may abandon that theory on which they have prosecuted this case from the very beginning, because even they know it's too stupid. Michael McCarthy loved Bella. Michael McCarthy loved Bella, and you heard yourself how he dealt with her. He may have had some strange interests, and he may have had some uncommon beliefs. You saw that he searched for Alex Jones on the internet, as millions of Americans have. Megyn Kelly interviewed him on national TV just this last Sunday. Michael may have searched for some conspiracy theorists on the internet because he may have been interested in what they had to say. So what? He had some internet searches for strange things. So what? I hope that none of us will ever be judged by the internet searches that we have made. And how significant did the prosecution think Michael's interest in demonology was? Well, Trooper Herman wasn't even interested in reading the books that the prosecution introduced in evidence. He had no idea what was in them. So one might ask, what is the relevance of those books? I wonder if Mr. Deacon read them. Maybe he can tell you what's in them. I did read them, and I can tell you that they both discussed, in a rather academic way, the evolution of concepts of good, evil, demons, and angels in religion and in the scriptures. And I can also tell you that they did not promote or encourage the killing of little children or even suggest that real people are possessed by demons. So why are they in evidence? Well, maybe Mr. Deacon can tell you. I hope that none of you will ever be judged by the books we take out of the library. I can tell you that there is not one shred of credible, believable evidence in this case that Michael was obsessed with anything that would lead him to kill a child he loved. But I can say the same thing about Rochelle. The testimony of Nicole Marquis, a witness who had no bone to pick with anyone and who considered herself an acquaintance of Rochelle's, described a very bizarre incident with Rochelle that took place after their session at the New Horizon Clinic. She believed it occurred in March of 2015, and that is probably accurate because the stipulation that was introduced in evidence yesterday states that the last time Rochelle attended that clinic was on April 11th. Nicole testified that, quote, "It was the strangest conversation I ever had." Rochelle told her that her parents were demons and that her father had reptilian features and was the leader of some demonic cult. Rochelle went on to describe how her parents had tried to pull her soul out of her body, but that she was too strong. She then said that the demons were trying to get to her by possessing Bella. Miss Marquis then described how Rochelle had been talking out loud on the train to a stranger sitting diagonally across from her, a woman who was paying no attention to her. Miss Marquis says that Rochelle told her, "She is one of them." Clearly, at least on this occasion, Rochelle was paranoid and delusional. She told a mere acquaintance that Bella was possessed by demons. So one can honestly wonder whether it was Rochelle who believed Bella was a demon and that it was her time to die. Something was really wrong with Rochelle at this time, and it was about the same time on March 19th that Rochelle told her therapist at Nova Psychiatric that her mother was a Satanist. But of course, she testified that Michael somehow made her say that. Can you believe anything this woman says? You know, in preparing these closing remarks, I realized that most of the evidence at this trial has been about Rochelle Bond, and not about Michael McCarthy, the person on trial for murder. The reason for that is the prosecution rests entirely upon what Rochelle says happened. So the prosecution has spent most of this trial unsuccessfully trying to prop her up. So I want to say a few words about Michael McCarthy. You've heard how he grew up in Southie, the younger son of divorced parents. He attended Catholic schools until Don Bosco closed, and he went to South Boston High School but dropped out before graduating. He got his GED and attended Bunker Hill Community College for a couple of semesters. It was a pretty normal childhood and adolescence until he got into drugs, which affected his whole life after that. You've heard that he has a seizure disorder and that he became partially disabled when he had a seizure, blacked out, and broke his shoulder. You've heard that he and his Pomeranian dog named Bailey were inseparable, not only because he loved that dog, but because Bailey was able to sense an oncoming seizure and warn him about it. You've heard that he attended the Sacred Heart Parish Church in Quincy every Sunday with his father. He was quiet and respectful. He took communion, and he made the sign of peace to the other parishioners at the end of Mass. But you have not heard a single thing that would make you think that he was capable of killing a child, particularly a child he loved and helped care for. Look at this picture. This is the picture of the family, and apparently a happy one. All four of them, Michael, Rochelle, Bella, and Bailey. You have not heard any credible testimony that he said or did a single thing that would make you think he's capable of murder. And you have not heard a single thing that would make you think that he was not telling the absolute truth when he was interrogated by Trooper Balducci in his hospital room on September 18th. That interview is the proof of his honesty, the proof of his innocence. You heard every word of it. And you have heard how Trooper Balducci went about trying to extract a confession from him. Here was Michael in a hospital room full of medication, and you have an exhibit which shows the medication and the painkillers he was on, and he was just about to have surgery. You can tell from Michael's voice, which is at times soft and halting, that he was obviously affected by the medication that he was on at the time. He was in a vulnerable state. He even told Balducci that he was nervous because of the surgery and that he was at his worst. But Balducci didn't care. Balducci said that Michael looked fine to him. Balducci didn't even bother to talk to a doctor or nurse to find out how Michael really was. That was because he thought it would be easier to break Michael down if he was vulnerable. They also wanted to catch Michael off guard. That is why they refused to tell Michael why they wanted to talk to him. Of course, Balducci explained that it was not at all their intention to keep anything from Michael. They just told Michael that they would tell him after they got the paperwork out of the way. But of course, they never did tell him. They say that was because he never asked. But you know that he did ask. They tried to intimidate him by having 3 state troopers interrogating him at the same time in a small hospital room. And Balducci started by being Mr. Nice Guy and trying to develop a disarming rapport with Michael. Well, the point is that Michael answered all their questions fully and truthfully over the course of about 30 minutes. And he even continued to answer the questions fully and truthfully when Balducci stopped being Mr. Nice Guy and turned up the pressure and the accusations. Of course, Balducci said that he never accused Michael of anything. He says he was just trying to get Michael's side of the story. Sure, he got Michael's side of the story. He just didn't like it. And that's when he accused Michael of blowing smoke up his ass and telling lies and lies and lies and lies. Not an accusation. What were the lies? They weren't any. Michael told Balducci from the very beginning of the interrogation that he lived with Rochelle at 115 Maxwell Street. He told them that they had lived together as a couple for 6 to 8 months. He told them without even being asked about Bella and where he believed she was. Despite all of Balducci's threats and accusations, Michael was unshaken. Now, Balducci said he was suspicious of Michael because he was aware of text messages between Sprinsky and Michael 2 days earlier, where Sprinsky texted Michael that Rochelle had told him that Michael had killed Bella. But Michael had texted back that Sprinsky shouldn't believe what that crazy person said because Bella was with DSS. The same thing that he told Balducci about Bella being taken by DSS. You listen to it, and I'm sure you will listen to it again during your deliberations. What Michael said has the ring of truth. At one point, Balducci says to Michael, "Mike, I'm worried about where Bella is." And Michael says, "Yeah, now I am too." And even when Balducci finally tells Michael that Bella is dead, listen carefully to Michael's reaction. He says, "Killed?" And Balducci says, "You don't know she's dead?" Michael says, "No." Balducci says again, "You don't know she's dead?" Michael says, "No." Balducci was clearly at a loss for words. But what is clear is that Michael had no idea what Balducci was talking about because he believed Bella was alive. Of course, Michael didn't ask Balducci to tell him about Bella being dead because he didn't believe she was. Of course, he didn't express grief or remorse. He didn't believe she was dead. Finally, when Balducci threatens Michael again and tells him this is his one chance to get out from under this, Michael says, "This is going too far, and I think I'm going to need a lawyer." Balducci says, how that was unreasonable for Michael to think he needed a lawyer. Even after Balducci had told Michael that he didn't believe anything he said and was accusing him of murder. I wonder what Balducci would do if the tables were turned. Think about the difference between Michael's statement to the police on September 18th and the statement Rochelle was making at the very same time. Michael's statement was straightforward and truthful. You have not heard that he was wrong or misleading or untruthful about anything he told the police, despite all the pressure, despite the threats, and despite the accusations. On the other hand, Rochelle's statement was riddled with lies and inconsistencies, and you've heard all about them. Can you believe that at that stage of the investigation, before the police could follow up on any of the leads, before they even had a chance to review the evidence they seized from 115 Maxwell Street, before that they had obtained any of the telephone call detail information, or text messages, or the cell site location information, or interviewed any of the witnesses, that they decided to charge Michael with murder and decided that Rochelle was just a minor player, an accessory after the fact. Talk about a rush to judgment. And then the prosecution spent the next year and a half trying to find some evidence to corroborate what they must have realized was Rochelle's unbelievable story. And we know that they haven't found anything. I wonder what they would have found if they had spent the time investigating Rochelle instead of Michael. I wonder what they would have found if they had gotten a hold of Dee's cell phone that mysteriously disappeared. I wonder what they would have found if they had traced Rochelle's movement, talked to her associates, and investigated her background. The prosecution decided to charge Mr. McCarthy with the murder of Bella Bond solely on the worthless word of Rochelle. And despite spinning their wheels for a year and a half to build a case against Michael, in the end, they are left only with her worthless words. Because there is nothing else. And finally, to add insult to injury, the prosecution makes a deal with the devil, the only devil in this case, to let Rochelle walk out of jail when you return a verdict in this case. It wasn't enough for the prosecution to let Rochelle walk away from a charge of murder. That wasn't a good enough deal to get her to throw Michael under the bus. She wanted more, and the prosecution gave it to her. Testify against Michael, they said, and you are free. Frankly, that disgusts me, and I hope you feel the same way. I expect that Mr. Deacon may say something about seeing that justice is done, but he and his colleagues have done everything possible to see that justice will not and cannot be done for poor Bella Bond. Now, you know, something has bothered me throughout this whole trial. Here is a photo of Bella Bond, happy and cozy and ready for bed. This is what Rochelle testified she did when she put Bella to bed. She gave Bella a bath, she rubbed her with lotion, she played with her feet, and she dressed her for bed, just like you see in that photograph. So, if Rochelle's story is true, and Bella was killed at bedtime, why wasn't Bella wearing pajamas? Why was she found in a heavy, tight stretch pants, which were not pajamas, but were part of an outfit with a tunic top that Trooper Balducci said she could wear to church? If that child were really being put to bed, why wasn't she wearing pajamas? Now, remember the audio recording of how Michael comforted and reassured little Bella about how to get rid of the monsters that plagued her nightmares? He told her, "Honey, you can fight them with love." His advice did not work. In the end, the monster came for that little girl, and it was her mother. Michael McCarthy is innocent. The real person who should be on trial here is Rochelle Bond. And let that be your verdict. Thank you.
Thank you. What You know what I'm going to do? I am going to take a very short 5-minute break here before we have Mr. Deacon make his closing, allow you to use the restroom, because I think his closing is going to be at least as long. We'll take a short break, and I'll see counsel at sidebar.
Court, all rise, please.
Zongo Court is back in session. Please be seated. Yes.
This is Bella Bond, age approximately 2.5. A happy, by all accounts in this case, a happy, energetic, enthusiastic little girl. She got to this point, age 2.5, in a journey with a single parent, her mother, Rochelle Bond. We have snapshots of how she got there on her journey with Rochelle Bond. This is Bella as an infant. A little older. Older still, and we'll talk a little bit more about this photo, I guess, later on in the opening. That's Bella on her 2nd birthday. Bella with her mother. Another shot with her mother. And Bella close to 2.5. That is a timeline of Bella Bond, timeline in snapshots of Bella Bond growing from a baby to a happy, well-adjusted, normal, enthusiastic 2.5-year-old. 4 months after the defendant came into her life, that's where she wound up. The evidence in this case has shown, that the defendant, Michael McCarthy, brought with him to 115 Maxwell Street a dark cloud, a cloud of trouble, very much like the dark cloud he told Rochelle Bond he saw over her head early on when they met. He brought that dark cloud, and we can call the cloud heroin, because it's heroin and other drugs, but primarily heroin, that led us all here. If there weren't heroin in this case, there wouldn't be a case. You could call that dark cloud, if you wanted to, COSA. The evidence in this case has shown beyond any reasonable doubt that on an evening, a nighttime in June of 2015, this man, Michael McCarthy, entered the bedroom of Bella Bond to try to put her back to sleep. He was in there for a matter of minutes, and when he went in, she was a healthy, energetic, maybe a little bit too energetic, young girl. By the time he was finished beating her and or asphyxiating her, she was dead. He had killed her. He had murdered her. And when not long after that, he, accompanied by Rochelle Bond and with her waiting in the car, dumped her body in a bag in the reserve channel. He had taken not only her life, but for a time anyway, her identity. Now, we may never know exactly what was in the defendant's mind when he went into her bedroom. Was he angry at her for continuously getting up out of bed, not going to bed when she was told? Was he frustrated with her not listening to his mother and forcing him to go in and put her to sleep? Or was it something else? We probably will never have the answer to that question. And we may also not know whether when he went in there believing that she was a demon, thereby showing his opinion of her, or whether instead, as somebody who's interested, as I said in my opening statement, in the occult and demonology and Satanism, he came up with that as an excuse to tell Rochelle Bond, in a desperate hope that she would believe it and that she would forgive or accept what he had done, or at a minimum, not go to the authorities right away. Again, we may never know the answer to that question. But there is a question that defense counsel asked you very near the end of his closing argument. He threw out a challenge. It was about when we were talking about demonology and Satanism and the occult. He threw out a challenge and said, there is not one piece of evidence to suggest that Mr. McCarthy would ever do anything to harm a child. And I ask you to think back on the testimony of his lifelong friend, Michael Sprinsky, a name that if it came up in the defendant's closing, it wasn't mentioned very much, if you noticed. Michael Sprinsky is in the front row. He was a friend of the defendant's since they were in 4th grade. And do you remember what he said when he testified that he told Rochelle Bond about his lifelong friend, Michael McCarthy? He said, you have to get away from him. He's crazy. Ladies and gentlemen, the defense counsel threw out a challenge to say, where's the evidence that he would do anything to harm a child? I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, ask Michael Sprinsky. Now, as you all know from the evidence, almost every adult in Bella's life, every major actor in this case, suffered from serious substance abuse issues and, in fact, tremendously gripping addictions. They used all kinds of drugs, but heroin is the link through all of them. They all had serious drug addiction, heroin addiction problems. And the result of that is that it can be difficult for any of us to get into their minds, to understand exactly how they were thinking and feeling at any given time. And the result is that you get a sort of fog, a haze of drug addiction. And you get a sense that decisions were made that people who are not addicted to drugs, people who are not addicts, might never make. That haze of drug addiction permeates this case. And although it may be difficult for any of us or any of you to put yourself in the shoes of people who are making decisions in that kind of context, nonetheless, that is your duty as jurors, is to go through the evidence, to look at the evidence carefully, and understand that yes, these are drug addicts, and yes, their drug addiction, as the court is, I expect to instruct you, is relevant to your consideration of their credibility, their ability to perceive, recall, and recount events. But I would suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, that it is not open to you to simply say, it's a bunch of addicts, we can't get through this, we can't sort through it. Rather, ladies and gentlemen, I challenge you to look at the evidence carefully and make a just decision. Defense counsel has argued to you that there is no evidence to suggest that Michael McCarthy was aware of anything other than what he says was Ms. Bond's representation to him that Bella was in DCF custody. That's his argument. Let's look at the defendant's defense. Because make no mistake, that is what it is. It is a defense. He is saying to you, I didn't know anything about it. As far as I knew, Bella was in DCF custody. Let's look at the evidence as to that defense. Let's start with the exhibit that David Krause showed you. And I hope all of you can see it reasonably clearly here. These are the cell tower mappings from June 26, 2015. It's one sheet from a series of exhibits, but this is the critical sheet. And remember what Trooper Herman told you. When Bella Bond's body was found on the beach in Winthrop, within just a couple of hours, it was national news. It was wall-to-wall news coverage. That was June 25th. The following morning, remember the testimony of David Krause, Sergeant Krause. He said that Rochelle Bond her phone was bouncing off a cell tower in this area. And that Mr. McCarthy's phone was was bouncing off cell towers actually below where this diagram was. If you look at the exhibit yourself, you'll see the earlier sheets that show this. But that within just a matter of a very few minutes, he went from cell towers down here toward the Quincy Mattapan area, within a very few minutes, and met up with Ms. Bond here. There can be no doubt, ladies and gentlemen, he was in a car when that happened, because he moved up to here. Then there are 3 calls at 9:51:58 that connected to this tower, at 9:52:44 that connected to this tower, and at 9:53:05 that connected to this tower. Now, defense counsel suggested to you, well, that couldn't happen because from this tower to this tower is roughly a mile, and to cover a mile in 67 seconds is just a little bit under 60 miles per hour. But defense counsel forgot his own cross-examination because he pointed out that towers do have some overlap. So if the car was in the edge of this tower here when the first call was made, in the area of this tower here when the second call was made, and in the early part of the overlap of this tower here, we're talking about a distance of no more than half a mile, which would put it at just under 30 miles an hour. And ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who've driven on Summer Street at 9:30 in the morning, it's not unreasonable to think that they might have covered that amount of space. Defense counsel also said that Sergeant Krause said it was more likely that the defendant was in the methadone mile area over here. Sergeant Krause said nothing of the sort. That's not correct. Rather, Sergeant Krause said that that was an unlikely possibility, though he couldn't say impossible. But what he also pointed out to you is, look at the green towers here, which is what Mr. McCarthy's phone is bouncing off. He pointed out to you that towers are laid out to be efficient. The idea is to have total coverage so there aren't gaps and people's calls don't get dropped. But you want to have enough towers so you have that, but you don't want a tower every 5 feet. It costs too much money for the company to put in. So what they try to do is like a lawn sprinkler system, have healthy overlap in an efficient way. Down here are towers here, 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 here. All these towers could have picked up calls as opposed to these towers. They didn't. It was these towers that picked it up. And what I would suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, is this shows that the defendant and Rochelle Bond took a drive on the morning after the body was found to the area of here, the Seaport District. And what did we see on the view? From this area of the Seaport District down here, you have an absolutely clear view of the dump site. Why did they take that trip? They took that trip because they found out that Bella's body had been located, and they wanted to know, had the police found the bag, the dump site? Maybe they didn't understand that the body had been recovered in Winthrop, and it therefore was obviously no longer weighted down in the reserve channel. Or maybe they knew very well where it was recovered, but decided what they needed to find out is, are there police boats there diving for weights? We now know there weren't on that day, although there would be some months later. They together wanted to know, have the police found the bag and the weights? Have they linked Bella Bond, who was Baby Doe at that time, to our dump site? What's the next piece of evidence? Look at the housing court texts. Actually, ladies and gentlemen, I did want to... There is one more side to this. Remember, in the context of these cell towers, that David Krause mapped these cell towers for both the defendant's phone and the cell phone, both, for the entire period from May to September. The only calls that either phone ever hit off these two towers were on June 26th. What that tells you is neither of these phones was in this area regularly enough that it was used to bounce off other towers. Does that mean they were never there at other times? Of course not. But what we know from Sergeant Krause is if your phone wasn't used in those areas, they would bounce off these two towers. The only time from May to September that they did was on the day after Bella Bond's body was discovered. The housing court texts, which are exhibit well, there's several exhibits, but you have exhibit 36A, 36B, 36C. And I'll put them up on the screen in a minute. One thing that's very important to understand about the text on July 16, 2015, when Rochelle Bond went to housing court and the defendant was texting back and forth with her, is that they were living together as a couple when those texts were made. And the way that you know that is, Yessi Amara Torres told you so, Michael Sprinsky told you so, the defendant's brother, Joseph McCarthy Jr., told you so. Remember, he said he had, sometime in April, he had brought the defendant's things over, helped him move into 115 Maxwell Street. Ms. Hermes told you so. She said she had several boyfriends, but the last man who was there stayed a long time, and that was the man who was there when the police came. Ms. Hermes told you so. The defendant's prescription medication tells you so. In September, when the search warrant was conducted, they photographed Michael McCarthy's prescription medication. People don't leave their prescription medication at other people's houses for any length of time. Also, remember Trooper Swan's testimony, that he looked at all the call detail records for the defendant's phone, and he noted that except for days when the phone wasn't in service, virtually every day, Michael McCarthy's phone bounced off the tower that served 115 Maxwell Street. If you need more evidence of that, listen to the defendant's interview with the Massachusetts State Police, where he said we were living together he said we had arguments like couples do. And he said that at the time, the relevant time period, I was living there every day. If you're still not satisfied, the defense counsel in his closing said to you that in June, July, August, and September, Michael McCarthy and Rochelle Bond were living together as a couple. Why is that important? It's important, ladies and gentlemen, because these are the text messages that were sent back and forth from housing court. First of all, there's one thing you should know. With the exception of these text messages that we're going to look at in detail, and by the way, do the jurors, is this showing on the juror screens? No. I saw I see people craning their neck to try to see. Let me see if I can rectify that. Now. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I apologize, but I think I'll have to read them to you. I don't know what's wrong with the system, but I will read them to you. When you look at Exhibit 36A, the text messages, and 36B, they're separately numbered. Look at one thing first. Almost all of these text messages through to the end are in a very aggressive, accusatory tone. The first thing he texted to her is, "Here we go." And then he says, "All my times in court, I've never heard anyone say we're at the bottom of the list, so you're going to be here for a long time." In other words, I knew there would be some bullshit. And he goes on to say that. At one point, he says to her, "Don't spick me," and continues saying aggressive and accusatory things. He texts her and says, I don't even believe that you're in housing court. Something like this always happens when you get your money." The tone of all the text messages is aggressive, accusatory, and controlling. And I think it's relevant to think about that, ladies and gentlemen, in the context of Rochelle Bond's statement that she felt controlled, that she felt intimidated by the defendant. Read the text messages. You can see it for yourself. You don't have to take her word for it. You certainly don't have to take my word for it. Read the text messages. And if that doesn't convince you, remember the testimony of Barrett Hoban. He works in eviction court. He's got to see some of the most angry, upset people anywhere in the court system. But he said she stood out to him. First, because he thought she was under the influence of something. And second, because she seemed upset. And when she asked him, "Can you please write your number down on this piece of paper?" he not only wrote the number down, but he decided to write the time down to give her cover for getting back. And if you think Barrett Hoban was being alarmist or wasn't reading the situation properly, you can note in the text messages that the defendant told Rochelle Bond that he had called Wynn Management and gotten the name of the lawyer and sent it. It says Barrett Hoban. He called Wynn Management. He got the name of the lawyer. He told her what to do. You don't have to take Rochelle Bond's word for it. It's in text messages. And more importantly, Barrett Hoban saw the exact same thing. But in the midst of all this controlling, aggressive, and accusatory text messages, about a third of the way through the process, he writes to her, "Also, definitely don't bring up the fact that you have a daughter to take care of, because then they might want to get DSS involved." And then he says, "And you don't need that shit in your life again. And you don't need that shit in your life again. They always seem to find a way that something's wrong where they take the kids and it's always BS." And then he writes to her, "Did you read any of my messages? Just wait in the courtroom and don't go anywhere. And most important, to not bring up that you have a daughter that you're taking care of. They will try to get the ESS," he mistyped it, "involved and try to take her." And then he writes, "Did you get what I said about Belle? Don't bring her up. Judge may order DSS involvement. Tell me you got this so I know." Then he texts, "We can't lose her to the state." And then he texts, "Kay, we love hers too much to even let those vampires be around her." Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is critical, because this is July 16th, 2015. 3 weeks after Bella Bond's body washed up in Winthrop on the beach. 3 weeks. And they had been living together as a couple, as everyone agrees, including Mr. Shapiro. They had been living together as a couple. What that means is that the day that he told the Massachusetts State Police, "I came home one day, and lo and behold, Bella was gone, and that was it. And she told me DCF had taken her." That's what he said to the Massachusetts State Police. That was his story to the police. "She told me that." But 3 weeks after she was gone, after she was in a bag in the reserve channel, 3 weeks after that, did he write and say, he couldn't write and say, don't tell them Bella's dead, obviously. But he writes to her something that he knows she'll understand. So if anybody's reading over her shoulder her text messages, or if someday a court somewhere, a jury somewhere is looking at them, it doesn't say, don't write that Bella's dead. He says, also, definitely don't bring up the fact that you have a daughter to take care of, which according to his story to the state police, she does not have anymore. Because then they might want to get DSS involved. Except he told the state police, DSS was involved at least 3 weeks earlier when I came home and found Bella not there anymore. He's talking in code, ladies and gentlemen. These texts make no sense if they're living together as a couple. Bella had been gone for 3 weeks. If he honestly believed that she was in DSS custody, he would have said, don't tell them that Bella's in DCF custody. Don't mention Bella because she's in DCF custody. Also, by the way, that might hurt your eviction chances, right? If you tell her she's in DCF custody, that might hurt. So he doesn't say that. He says, don't tell them that you have a daughter to take care of because then they might want to get DSS involved. Here's what happened, ladies and gentlemen. When he wrote this, he was thinking what his phone would look like. And by the way, if you're saying to me right now, Mr. Deacon, how do you know that he's worried about what his phone might say? Remember the text to Michael Sprinsky 2 months later. 2 months later, when Michael Sprinsky accused him of the murder of Bella Bond, what did he write? After he wrote a denial, he wrote, crazy thing to be talking about on the phone. Crazy thing to be talking about on the phone. But he had to talk about it on the phone. Because he was worried that Rochelle Bond would bring up Bella in an attempt to keep her apartment. That she would say, I have a daughter that I'm taking care of, even though she didn't. Even though that had happened, her death had happened at least 3 weeks earlier. But he was afraid she would use it to try to keep her apartment. And if the court saw that she was under the influence or that she was in arrearages on her rent, they might order DCF involvement. And he knew this was a question that neither he nor she could answer from DCF. This is code, ladies and gentlemen. And you know it because what happened is he didn't know at this time that the story he would ultimately settle on when the police came was, I came home one day and she told me that DCF had taken Bella. He hadn't thought it through yet at that time. He was just thinking in the moment what to tell her not to do in housing court. Then the Sprinsky text. This is Exhibit 19A. September 16th of 2015, 2 months to the date after housing court. Michael Sprinsky wrote to him, please say it ain't so, Mike. Please, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And then he calls him a punk ass. Michael Sprinsky calls him a punk ass. And he goes back and forth and he says, I have no clue what you're talking about. And they go on. But then Michael Sprinsky, and it's really important to look here at the timing of this, because these answers are going, these texts are coming back fairly quickly back and forth. But Michael Sprinsky writes in a text saying, she told me everything, me bro, can't stop puking, man. She say you killed Bella, bro. Then he wrote, how the fuck could you do that? And then he said, dude, WTF, man, what is going on, bro? Where is kid, man? And after that, and I apologize because it's actually only a minute, so I had misread this, but after that, the defendant writes, wow, you listening to a cracked out hooker. DSS took Bella, that's what she told me, and this is crazy saying on the phone. And then he asked Michael Sprinsky something, he says, why the fuck would she wait until now to tell, now that Sir Crack-A-Lot's back, presumably Joe Amoroso? Think about it, dude. Why would I still be with her? He threw out a challenge. He was saying to Michael Sprinsky, why would I still be with her? The answer, ladies and gentlemen, is in the housing court texts. Because she knew what had happened. And he worried that she would tell. He worried that she would spill the beans in housing court, inadvertently perhaps. He stayed with her, partly probably because he liked the apartment, partly probably because he didn't mind injecting her disability checks and Bella's benefits into his veins, but also because if he left her, he couldn't keep tabs on her. Another thing to look at about the text to Michael Sprinsky. Immediately after that, this is Exhibit 19, immediately after that text exchange back and forth, the defendant turned off his phone, and there's no more cell phone use by the defendant at all. None. He shut off his phone. And ask yourself this. Imagine for a moment that Michael McCarthy actually is innocent of this murder. Imagine that. And his lifelong friend, Michael Sprinsky, texts him and accuses him of the murder. Do you immediately jump to, wow, you're listening to a cracked out hooker? Or do you say, that doesn't make any sense. What are you talking about? And then he would bring up DCF maybe. But then, ladies and gentlemen, if you're truly innocent, I know he was in the hospital, I understand that. Wouldn't you say to Michael Sprinsky, can you do me a favor? Can you contact DCF and just make sure she's there? Because this is ridiculous. I don't know what you're talking about. Can you just check and make sure Bella's okay? Remember what he said. He lived with her. He cared about her. They had a relationship. No, he shuts off his phone like that. And by the way, if you think maybe Michael Sprinsky wouldn't be the person that you would ask to call DCF on your behalf, I get it. But he had his brother. Look at the number of calls back and forth between Dee's cell phone during the summer and his brother. He could have called his brother and said, look, they're talking some crazy stuff here, but you know, there's something that somebody's telling me Bella's not in DCF custody. Can you just call and make sure she's okay? Like, I want to make sure. If you were innocent, if you had nothing to do with her murder, would you shut off your phone without making any effort to verify that she's okay? No, ladies and gentlemen. You wouldn't do that at all. The next thing that you should look at is the interview with the police. His interview with the Massachusetts State Police. And I'll come back to it in a minute because I think it gets really to the heart of what's going on here. That was on September 18th. 3 days later, on September 21st, and I'm sorry, I'm scrolling, these are the Sprinsky texts. 3 days later, the Massachusetts State Police dive team recovered these weights, and that's a picture of the condition that they were in. And they found them based on the description that Rochelle Bond had given. That's correct. They found these weights and they brought them up and they looked at them. This is one of them, the 10-pound weight. And you've seen these before, of course, but this is the 25-pound weight that Trooper McKenzie brought up from the bottom of the reserve channel. And this is the 25-pound weight that was ultimately recovered, York barbell that was ultimately recovered from the defendant's father's plumbing shop. They found them in this bag, Rochelle Bond's laundry bag. And you can see, it's obvious, it had been in the water for quite some time. If you look carefully at this photograph, you'll see there would appear to be orange sea snails clinging to the bag. Even as they're holding it up, they're clinging. They're stuck on the side of the bag. And that's the bag that they found it in. These are the two weights that are here in the courtroom just after they've been pulled out of the reserve channel. And if you look carefully at this, and I'm very sorry that the jury monitors don't seem to be working, because in the middle of this photograph is a Billard 10-pound barbell, which the police didn't seize, but they photographed when they did the search warrant the next day at Joseph McCarthy's plumbing shop. You will have this Billard 10-pound barbell in the jury room. You will also have this photograph. And of course, you don't have Emil Tritino's expertise in comparing weights. But you can look at these two, and I think come to the conclusion they certainly appear, from layman's terms, to be identical, except for the amount of rust on this one. And you can look at the two 25-pound York barbells that Mr. Tritino testified about, and you can see that what he's saying makes sense. They do appear to be exactly identical, but for the rust. Why is this important? Well, because they came from the defendant's father's plumbing shop, to which the defendant had a key and Rochelle Bond did not. But Mr. Shapiro has said, so what? What does that matter? You heard testimony from the defendant's brother that when he was moving the defendant in, remember the story? I was moving him in, and a bag sort of half fell out of the truck, and it made a clanging sound. So I asked him, what's that? And he said, oh, I'm bringing weights over for Rochelle to do crunches. Rochelle Bond, the drug addict, the heroin addict, who had had surgery on her stomach a year earlier, and who earlier in March had asked the defendant's help to do Reiki practice because she was having so much pain in her stomach. He said, I brought these weights over to do crunches. This one, maybe, if you're in really good shape, you can do crunches with a 10-pound weight. But I question whether somebody with weakness in her core and distress from surgery would be using a 10-pound weight, any weight, to be doing crunches. But even if you buy it, you had a chance to hold the 25-pound weight from the plumbing shop. You had a chance to feel it. I would suggest to you that nobody who is not in phenomenal shape, a real competitive bodybuilder, is doing crunches with this weight. Feel it in the court, feel it in the jury room. Weigh it. Imagine yourself doing crunches with this weight. See what you'd find. Moreover, ladies and gentlemen, if you're picking weights for somebody to do crunches, do you pick a 10-pounder and a 25-pounder? That's quite a gap. Maybe a 5-pounder and a 10-pounder, or a 10-pounder and a 15-pounder, I suppose, if you're really in good shape. But a 10 and a 25? And most important, ladies and gentlemen, if you're stealing weights, appropriating weights, we're going to call it, from the basement common area, for your girlfriend to use exercising, holding like this against her clothing, do you pick the rusty, grossest, most disgusting ones that you can find? You all had a chance to hold the weight from the plumbing shop. Remember what happened when you touched it? Every single one of you was doing this, and the court officers had to bring gel. If you are bringing weights to your girlfriend to do crunches, and there are weights like the ones shown on the screen now, which you have a photograph of, that are much newer, encased in a gray plastic, and that look like something that somebody might actually want to touch, wouldn't you pick those if you were doing that? Wouldn't you pick something like that, a 15-pounder that's in good, clean condition? Ladies and gentlemen, there were even 25-pound weights that were photographed, they weren't seized, that you can see on the screen, that look significantly cleaner and less disgusting than the York barbell that the defendant's brother would have you believe he said he picked out for her to do crunches. It doesn't make sense, ladies and gentlemen. And why did Joseph McCarthy Jr. come in here and say that preposterous story? I'll tell you why. Because he knew very well that these weights connected the defendant to Bella Bond's murder. He knew very well that the defendant had gone to that plumbing shop after he killed this child and selected weights in a hurry. He didn't care what they looked like. He didn't care whether they were the right gap or not. He didn't care whether they were usable for crunches. He wanted weights to weigh down a bag with a little girl in it. His brother knew that this was an issue in the case because remember the detective said when they went and did the search warrant, they talked to the defendant's father. They knew, both he and his father knew that those weights were taken out of the plumbing shop. They knew the significance of it, and the defendant's brother came in here and cooked up a story that makes absolutely no sense when you parse it. Why did he do that? It's the oldest story in the book, ladies and gentlemen. Blood is thicker than water. He came in here to protect his brother. And let's talk about where the defendant took those weights to dump the body. Remember the testimony of Taryn Devlin? Remember what she said? We used to go there to the Eddy, which is the top circled area, but she also talked about the Yellow Brick Road, the Mills, I forget all the names, but the Eddy was the one that she circled up here to the top. We used to go there because it was secluded. I'm not sure if she used that word, but she said out of the way. No one would bother us there. Even she mentioned something about the police, maybe not bothering them there, or they went there to avoid the police. I can't remember. She mentioned the police. I can't remember the context, but she mentioned that they picked this place in part with the police in mind. They used to go there virtually every weekend in the summer to hang out. He knew that area. He's known it since he was a teenager. He went there with his girlfriend of 5 years, Taryn Devlin, who came in here and testified that that's exactly what happened. So the bag belonged to Rochelle Bond. It was her laundry bag. The weights belonged to the defendant's father, and he grabbed them in a hurry. He didn't care what they looked like. They weren't going to be used for exercise. They were going to sit, in his mind, at the bottom of the reserve channel forever. And then they went to the dump site that he had been going to, the remote dump site that he had been going to since he was a teenager. Ladies and gentlemen, defense counsel talked about fingerprints. And they're real fingerprints And you heard Trooper Carol Settlesing said, we can't fingerprint weights that have come from the bottom of the reserve channel. But there are figurative or symbolic fingerprints as well. And the defendant's fingerprints, symbolic fingerprints, are all over the dumping of that body. It could not be more unmistakable, those fingerprints. And then what happens when he comes to be interviewed by the Massachusetts State Police? I told you I'd come back to it if my technological skills will allow me to. There we are. There we go. It's just a picture of the transcript to kind of evoke but what I do it to remind you, you have the tape in the jury room, and you have the transcript in the jury room. Listen to that interview, because there's a lot of vital information in it. First of all, when they're asking him where he lives, he distances himself from 115 Maxwell Street. He says, he doesn't mention it as the first address, and when he finally does mention it, he says, well, I live there, but sometimes I live with other people too, here and there, kind of, yeah, no, it's, let's not talk too much about 115 Maxwell Street. But later, he says that they are a couple, and he lives at 115 Maxwell Street. And when they're talking about the supposed incident when suddenly he comes home and no Bella, and oh, she's off with DCF, when he's talking about that, the trooper asks him, so at this time you were living there every day, meaning Maxwell Street, right? And he goes, yeah, right. He was living there every day, but when the police asked him his residence, it was going to be somewhere else, sort of, kind of, maybe somewhere I spend time lots of places. And remember what they asked him, they said, Rochelle Bond, is she your girlfriend? He goes, no, Kathleen's my girlfriend. But as he goes on, he forgets that he's done that, and he says, yeah, I moved in with her in wintertime, and I just stayed, which, by the way, is exactly the same thing Rochelle Bond said. Remember that? She said he came over one day, and he just didn't leave. What does he say happened? He says, I came over one day and I just didn't leave. And I've been living there for the last 6 months. And when we have arguments, we have arguments about the normal things like couples do. We have arguments like couples do. So I live at 115 Maxwell Street, but I live lots of places. Don't ask me too much about that. Rochelle Bond, no, she's just like a friend. She's not my girlfriend, even though we've lived together as a couple for 6 months. He's distancing himself, ladies and gentlemen. Listen to this interview, and what you will hear is the actions of somebody who has rehearsed what he will say to the police for a long time. He has had time to think about, what do I say if they come? But he made 2 critical errors, absolutely critical errors. Number 1, he forgot to act surprised. Forgot to act surprised about Bella. And 2, he forgot to act concerned. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the core of it. Because when the police came to talk to him, what would an innocent man say? What would somebody who really had nothing to do with Bella Bond's murder say? He would say, when they start asking questions about Bella and Bella being taken by DSS, when they get into that part of the interview, and by the way, listen carefully, that's long before there's any sort of stepping up of the intensity of the interview, long before. They're just asking him, so tell me how that went down. I don't know how DCF works. Explain it to me. At that point, and look, I understand, no one is going to say to the state police, hey, my crazy friend Michael Sprinsky called and accused me of her murder, and I said, no, she's in DCF, that's what I understood. No one's going to say that to the state police. I get that, right? But what about saying, hey, wait a minute, I heard on the street, maybe Bella's not in DCF custody? I just heard something. You don't have to source it. Have you guys checked? Do you know, is she in DCF custody? Is she okay? Right? Because this is somebody that he has had a relationship with for several months, if he's innocent, if he didn't do it. He had a relationship with us for several months. And then mysteriously one day he's told, yep, DCF came and took her, and that's it. And no caseworker ever came around, and there was no process, and Rochelle never tried to get her back. Despite the photographs we saw, in his mind, Rochelle never tried to get her back. No, that didn't happen. There's no question to the troopers, is Bella okay? Right? And an innocent person who had a relationship with a child, who was told she was taken by DCF, and then police come and ask her to talk about that DCF, who has been accused of her murder 2 days earlier, is going to want to know, is she okay? And by the way, can you imagine something more calculated to make the troopers think that you really are innocent than your first reaction to be, is she all right? Is she in DCF or not? And if you checked, and is she okay? Nothing would be more persuasive to the troopers than if he had done that. Right? It would tell you he cares about this child, and he actually legitimately wants to know. He planned out how to deny knowledge of this but he didn't think how an innocent person would act. He thought about what an innocent person would say, but he forgot that there's as much communication in what we do and as there is in what's not said as there is in what is said. I told you that in my opening statement. Listen for what isn't said. What isn't said is concern about Bella. Even after they tell him specifically she's not in DCF custody, and Rochelle Bond is saying that it's something really different, something that involves you. What's his response? They just told him she is not in DCF custody. They told him straight out. His answer, like what? He doesn't care what the police know about Bella Bond not being in DCF custody. That's not his concern. His concern is, what is Rochelle Bond saying about me? Why? Because he knows full well that she knows what he did. She knows what he did, and he wants to know, what is she saying about it? Listen to that interview carefully. Listen as much to what isn't said and how he acts as to what he does say. Why did the defendant lie to the police and tell this story about one day that the DCF just came and took Bella? Because that's the story he had rehearsed. And when he rehearsed it, he forgot what he had said in the housing court texts. He forgot that 3 weeks after Bella's death, he had written in code, don't tell them that you have a child to take care of because they will get DCF involved. That's why. Because he forgot that he had told a different story in code to Rochelle Bond. That's why. He did it because he murdered the child, and he put her in a bag with weights, and he dumped her body. That's why he did it. Because he murdered an innocent 2.5-year-old girl. Defense counsel spent a lot of time talking to you about Rochelle Bond. He absolutely, as he said he did, put Rochelle Bond on trial. The defense counsel also promised you in both his opening and closing that he would show you evidence that Rochelle Bond was responsible for Bella Bond's murder. Where is that evidence, ladies and gentlemen? There is no evidence in this case to suggest that she killed her daughter in any way, shape, or form. What there is in this case is a lot of evidence to suggest that Rochelle Bond, as she has throughout most of her life, behaved very badly. Not just badly, but awfully. Inexcusably in some sense, no doubt about it. There can be no doubt about it. And there is no doubt that she was involved in this crime. She was charged as an accessory after the fact. She pleaded guilty to it. She's going to be sentenced to it. But acting badly, behaving badly, perhaps even subconsciously or consciously wanting to distance yourself from the worst parts of the account, wanting to not to feel like a monster because she didn't call for help right away, wanting to feel like not like a monster because she covered up for the defendant for several months. Wanting to feel that way, that's not right. Nobody's defending that in any way, shape, or form. It's wrong. It's probably illegal. But you know what else it is? It's human. It is a human response. And I'm not justifying it, but what I'm saying is you can understand the desire as she goes along to tell a story where she's more and more removed from the decision-making, from the choices that are evil and illegal. But that's not the same as evidence that she killed her daughter. That's what's promised, is evidence that she killed her daughter, and it's not there. What do we know about Rochelle Bond? What do we know for sure? We know that all her life she has struggled with drug addiction, substance abuse and drug addiction, and mental health issues, no doubt about it. Absolutely true. We know that. We also know that she is undisciplined and perfectly willing to bend or break the law to get what she wants for herself and for part of the time for Bella. No doubt about it. No doubt about it. But we also know something else about her. We know that within her pretty extraordinary limitations, she loved her daughter. And she was trying, again, with some very significant limitations, to be a mother to her. How do you know that? Remember the testimony of Marilyn Santana that she would see him through the window, or hear him through the window and see them, they'd be playing peekaboo? Remember Marilyn Santana's testimony that they used to sit down at the kitchen table and hold hands before they ate and bow their heads? And Marilyn Santana thought that they were praying. And in fact, Rochelle Bond told you that's exactly. She had been raised to say grace. Remember that? Remember Yesimara Torres saying that where they would be out on the back porch and their two girls would be playing together? That Rochelle Bond always wanted to be with her mother in and around her legs, and how Rochelle was kind and appropriate with Bella? Remember what Michael Sprinsky told you? The defendant's lifelong friend said, when I first came there, which was not long after the defendant came there, the housekeeping was very nice, things were clean and reasonably neat, and she was very good with Bella. She was loving, caring, just like a mother should. Michael Sprinsky also told you that as the weeks went on after the defendant arrived there, things went downhill. And when you're thinking about Michael Sprinsky's testimony, remember this, and pay attention to Michael Sprinsky's testimony. Not only is he the defendant's lifelong friend, but it was clear he wasn't there to, he didn't come here to sell you something. He didn't come here to say Rochelle Bond is a great person and the defendant's a bad person. He told it, I would suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, you saw him. You had a chance to observe him. And I conclude you could find he was telling the truth. He was an honest man. And he told you that at least at the outset, Rochelle Bond was a good mother. Joseph McCarthy Jr., the defendant's own brother, said, yeah, she seemed to be fine. Everything was normal. She was a good mother. No question about it. There's also, I'm blanking on her name, the witness that the defendant called, who used to see Rochelle Bond in at the Nova Psychiatric. Remember that? Remember what she said? She said, I saw her maybe as many as 20 weeks over a 1 or 2 week period. And I saw her taking care of Bella. And I also saw her taking care of a little boy that she was babysitting for some of those visits. And she went into detail. She said she was always kind with Bella. She would help her get in and out of her clothing as she needed to. She would give her things that she needed. She wanted to make sure she had snacks, that kind of thing. She talked to her in a nice tone of voice. She was good and kind to Bella. So everybody says it. But not just everybody. The Facebook posts that we saw, do those look like a child who's being raised by somebody who's a monster or somebody who's not kind and decent to them? And even the defendant, when he was talking to the Massachusetts State Police, said he was surprised when he heard the DCF story because she was really a good mother. Everybody who had a chance in this case to observe Rochelle Bond with Bella Bond said the same thing. She was a good mother. Now we all know she wasn't a great mother. She wasn't the mother that any of us would have wanted for Bella Bond. That's for absolutely sure. But within her limitations, she was trying. And when defense counsel was telling you that the evidence will show that Rochelle Bond killed her daughter, where's the evidence in that? Where's the suggestion that she harbored some sort of animosity toward her, such that she would turn on a dime and kill her? Defense counsel suggests to you, well, Rochelle Bond told a lot of people lies about where Bella was. Of course she did. She told you, what was she supposed to do? If she had walked in and said, you know, I'd like to renew my benefits, and by the way, my daughter's dead, it probably wouldn't have gone so well. No one's defending what she did. No one's saying that was right. But the story she was telling were protecting not only herself, and they were protecting herself, make no mistake about it, but they were protecting him too. Now, there will be one or more of you on this jury, maybe many more, who will say, I don't care if he strangled her. I don't care if she was unconscious after being strangled. I don't care if he told her he would kill her if she told anyone. I don't care how controlling or intimidating he was. I don't care how vulnerable or impressionable she was, any of that. I don't care. A mother who doesn't immediately seek help for her daughter, who continues to live with the defendant who killed her for a period of time, who talked about to him in loving terms like hon, love. No, can't credit her testimony. I can't do it. And I guess I would understand that if you reach that conclusion. But there will be others of you on that jury who will say, wait a minute, people are complicated. People are multifaceted. People aren't just good or evil. People aren't, one way or the other. People are a combination of vice and virtue, all of us. There's a saying, nobody's as bad as their worst day, nobody's as good as their best day. We're all a mixed bag. Now, Rochelle Bond is a mixed bag, really, really heavily mixed with the troubles on the back. I understand that. But those of you who are willing to look at people as complex will say to yourself, now we have to look at the evidence. It's not enough to simply say, Rochelle Bond didn't do what I think I would have done if my child had been murdered in front of me. Right? Instead, I'm going to look at the evidence. What did she tell you? The first thing she told you is that she was afraid of the defendant. She was actually in fear of him. Well, let's see. He had murdered her daughter essentially in front of her. He had strangled her into unconsciousness. He had told her that he would kill her. He had told her that there were people outside who would monitor her if she said anything. There's reason to believe that she had a basis for some fear. And getting back to what Mr. Sprinsky said, he told her later, you need to get away from him. He's crazy. That's his lifelong friend's assessment of Michael McCarthy. Michael McCarthy, sure, he goes to church on Sunday with his father. They go out to eat afterwards. Fine. But his lifelong friend who's known him since 4th grade says, get away from him. He's crazy. So before you reject her claim that she was actually afraid of him, think about Michael Sprinsky's testimony. But she also allowed, and remember this is a critical point. Remember when she said, I was afraid I would be blamed. I was afraid I would be blamed if it came forward. Well, guess what? She was blamed. She was charged as accessory after the fact, convicted. She's now a convicted felon on that charge. But she was also recognizing, maybe without, I shouldn't say she was recognizing, she is being blamed. That fear was real. Because when Michael McCarthy got apprehended for the murder of Bella Bond, after he worked on it for a year and a half, we come out to a defense of she killed the child, with no evidence to support that claim at all. So is there some reason for her to be concerned that she would be blamed? And then remember the other thing she said, and it was almost like it was hard for her to say it. But she acknowledged that if she left Michael McCarthy or Michael McCarthy left her, she would be left with no one to talk to about her predicament. Now at first glance, like, so what? Who cares? Why would that matter? Think back to when you were a child. I hope you have to think back to when you were a child and you did something wrong. Maybe something kind of seriously wrong. Hopefully none of you have done anything really seriously wrong. But think back to when you were a child. Maybe you and a friend did some mischief, some vandalism or something, something like that. Or maybe it's just as simple as getting a bad grade and being ashamed to tell your parents that you were going to get a D in something or fail a class. Do you remember what happens when you're in that predicament? What you want to do, the only thing you want to do is talk to the person you did it with, right? Are we going to get caught? Did anybody see? Did the police look into stuff like this? Could we get arrested? Could you go to jail for this? Do you think anyone's going to catch us? Well, wait, do you remember those questions? Or if you got a bad grade, you tell your best friend, like, how am I going to tell my parents I got a D? What do I do? Should I tell them now? Should I wait till the report cards come? There is a natural human impulse when you're frightened, when you're scared, to want to process that fear with somebody. And there was no one for her to process it with other than Michael McCarthy. Does that make it right? Is it to be an accessory after the fact? Does that make it right? Of course not. But it makes it real. It makes it feel true. And then the last thing she said was, I accepted a shot at heroin in the neck. And by the way, I don't think defense counsel ever impeached her in such a way that suggests that she told the police that he forcefully injected her neck. He just said, but in any event, your memory is controlled, not mine. But she was clear with you, I wanted that. I was a little sick anyway, and it made me just not feel. And if there's anything that rings true in this case, ladies and gentlemen, it's that Rochelle Bond and many of the other people that she was friends with, including the defendant, there was nothing that she wanted more than not to feel, to escape. Right? That's the evil of heroin, is that she, rather than doing something about her situation, rather than doing what was right, she did what was easy. She did what was painless. She went to the drugs. And she said after that, the floodgates opened, and they were doing a lot of heroin every day. And I would suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, that's very plausible. Their defense counsel has suggested to you that the cooperation agreement that Rochelle Bond agreed to should undermine your confidence in her completely, that you should simply not accept her testimony because of that cooperation agreement. And I expect to you that the judge will instruct you on the cooperation agreements and that you should examine testimony that's given pursuant to the cooperation agreement with great care and caution. Fair enough, ladies and gentlemen. But defense counsel suggested to you that there was a rush to judgment. And I would suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, she has been charged with accessory after the fact from the beginning. This is not a cooperation agreement where the police or the district attorney's office said, we believe you're guilty of murder, but we're going to go ahead and break it down to accessory after the fact. That's what she was charged with, and she pleaded guilty to it, and she's going to be sentenced for it. Defense counsel also suggests to you that there was a rush to judgment in the sense that the police arrested the defendant for murder early on in the investigation. Ladies and gentlemen, the police have an obligation to make life and death decisions every day. They knew at the time that the baby doe had washed up in Winthrop on the beach. They knew that she had washed up in plastic bags. They knew when Rochelle Bond said the body was dumped and described an area over in the reserve channel. Think about that, ladies and gentlemen. Think about what that means. She didn't say, oh yeah, the body was dumped on a beach in Winthrop. Right? She told them something that was concrete and tangible, and within 3 days was verified by a dive team. Sure, the police absolutely can say, we're not going to arrest somebody for murder, we're just going to leave them out on the street when they're suspected of a murder and see what happens. Right? But you can understand the police's reluctance to do that. And what defense counsel didn't mention is that there was then a grand jury investigation. And remember all the witnesses that I asked, defense witnesses and Commonwealth's witnesses, did the police interview you? Yes, they did. Every single witness that the defense called, except the 2 women who saw the defendant in church with his father. Remember I asked them, did the police speak to you about this? Did you testify in the grand jury? Yes, I did. The police gathered, they did search warrant at Maxwell Street, not once but twice. They searched the defendant's car with a search warrant. They searched the plumbing shop and found the weights. They did search warrants for call detail records and cell site location information. They poured over those records. They mapped that information to come up with information about the defendant and Rochelle Bond going to the location of the dump the day after. They did all these things. They recovered the weights. They recovered the weights from the plumbing shop. And each and every step that they took confirmed their view that the defendant had killed Bella Bond. Now, it also confirmed their view that Rochelle Bond was involved. No question about it. And it confirmed their view that she might be even more involved than she was willing to let on. It confirmed all those things. But ladies and gentlemen, what it told them at the end of the day is if you want to know who killed Bella Bond, look at who went to the Seaport District on the day after her body washed up in Winthrop to look at the dive scene. Look at who wrote text messages to Rochelle Bond 3 weeks after Bella would have left the house and said, don't tell them that you have a daughter to take care of because they might want to get DSS involved. Look at who responded to Michael Sprinsky's text messages by shutting off his phone, not trying to get any information about her whereabouts to check if she was in DCF and okay, just shut off his phone. Look at who told the police the story about coming home suddenly one day and Bella was gone without realizing that 3 weeks after that would have happened, he had sent text messages saying, don't mention Bella because they might want to get DCF involved. Look at who had access to the weights from the plumbing shop, weights that would be very good for weighing down a body and very bad for bringing home to your girlfriend to exercise. Look at all of these things, all of this information. Look at where the weights were found, at a dump site where he had hung out as a teenager. And 2 things will become very clear to you. First, that Michael Sprinsky was right when he said Rochelle Bond should get away from the defendant because he's crazy. And the second thing that you will know, beyond any reasonable doubt, is that he killed Bella Bond, that he took her body and put it in a duffel bag, that he got the weights from his father's plumbing shop and put them in the duffel bag, that he drove in his car with Rochelle Bond to the dump site where he had been going since he was a teenager, and he took that girl's body in that bag and he dumped it. And there's only one reason somebody dumps a body, ladies and gentlemen. Innocent people don't dump bodies. People don't dump bodies to cover up evidence of innocence. People dump bodies to cover up evidence of guilt. There is absolutely no question that the defendant dumped Bella Bond's body. And there is absolutely no question, therefore, that he murdered the child. Defense counsel said to you that this should be a trial of Rochelle Bond for murder, and that she's getting away with murder. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence in this case against the defendant establishes beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant killed that child and dumped her body. And if you find him not guilty, he will be getting away with murder.
Thank you. So ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take the morning break. My instructions are about an hour. So we're going to go into the lunch hour. We're going to provide you with lunch. So I'd like to keep it to about 15 or 20 minutes so we don't go too far in that lunch hour. We'll see you then.
Court, all right, please. Here is your step now.